craned my neck, as I had seen beggars do, and implored, "I want to come with you. Please let me join you. Do you have any idea where I am going?" I paused. That question had never occurred to me. "No, but it makes no difference. I want to become your disciple. You are my role model. I always travel alone and want no disciples or students, thank you. And I am certainly no role model for anyone, much less for you," Shams said. "So just go on your way. But if you are still going to look for a master in the future, please keep in mind a golden rule: there are more fake gurus and false teachers in this world than the number of stars in the visible universe. Don't confuse power-driven, self-centered people with true mentors. A genuine spiritual master will not direct your attention to himself or herself and will not expect absolute obedience or utter admiration from you, but instead will help you to appreciate and admire your inner self. True mentors are as transparent as glass. They let the light of God pass through them. Please give me a chance," I implored. All the famous travelers had someone to assist them on the road, like an apprentice or something. Shams scratched his chin pensively, as if acknowledging the truth in my words. "Do you have the strength to bear my company?" he inquired. I jumped to my feet, nodding with all my heart, "I certainly do. And my strength comes from within." "Very well, then. Here is your first task. I want you to go to the nearest tavern and get yourself a pitcher of wine. You will drink it here in the bazaar." Now, I was used to scrubbing the floors with my robes, polishing pots and pans till they sparkled like the fine Venetian glass I had seen in the hands of an artisan who had escaped from Constantinople long ago when the Crusaders had sacked the city. I could chop 100 onions in one sitting or peel and mince cloves of garlic, all in the name of spiritual development. But drinking wine in the midst of a crowded bazaar to that end was beyond my ken. I looked at him in horror. "I cannot do that. If my father learns, he'll break my legs. He sent me to the dervish lodge so that I could become a better Muslim, not a heathen. What will my family and friends think of me?" I felt the burning glare of Shams on me and shivered under the pressure, just like the day I had spied on him behind closed doors. "You see, you cannot be my disciple," he pronounced with conviction. "You are too timid for me. You care too much about what other people think. But you know what? Because you are so desperate to win the approval of others, you'll never get rid of their criticisms, no matter how hard you try." I realized that my chance to accompany him was slipping away and rushed in to defend myself. "How was I to know you were not asking that question on purpose? Wine is strictly forbidden by Islam. I thought you were testing me, but that would be playing God. It is not up to us to judge and measure each other's devoutness," Shams answered. I looked around in despair, not knowing what to make of his words. My mind pounded like dumpling dough. Shams went on, "You say you want to travel the path, but you don't want to sacrifice anything to that end. Money, fame, power, lavishness, or carnal pleasure, whatever it is that one holds most dear in life, one should dispose of that first." Patting his horse, Shams concluded with an air of finality, "I think you ought to stay in Baghdad with your family. Find an honest tradesman and become his apprentice. I have a feeling you might make a good merchant someday. But don't be a greedy one. Now, with your permission, I need to get going." With that, he saluted me one last time, kicked his horse, and galloped away, the world sliding under its thundering hoofs. I hopped onto my horse and chased him toward the outskirts of Baghdad, but the distance between us got greater and greater until he was no more than a dark spot in the distance. Even long after that spot had disappeared on the horizon, I could feel the weight of Shams' stare on me. Ella. Northampton, May 24, 2008. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. Being a big believer of this saying, every morning, weekdays, and weekends alike, Ella made her way to the kitchen. A good breakfast, she thought, set the tone for the rest of the day. She had read in women's magazines that families who regularly had a proper breakfast together were more cohesive and harmonious than those in which each member rushed out the door half hungry. And though she firmly believed in this research, she had yet to experience the joyful breakfast the magazines wrote about. Her breakfast experience was a collision of galaxies where every member of her family marched to a different drummer. Everyone wanted to eat a different thing at breakfast, which was entirely against Ella's notion of eating together. How could there be unity at a table when one nibbled toasted bread and jam Jeanette while another chomped honey-puffed cereal Avi and a third waited patiently to be served scrambled eggs David and a fourth refused to eat anything at all Orly all the same, breakfast was important. Every morning she prepared it, determined that no child of hers would begin the day munching on candy or some other junk food. But this morning when she entered the kitchen, instead of brewing coffee, squeezing oranges, or toasting bread, the first thing Ella did was to sit at the kitchen table and turn on her laptop. She logged on to the internet to see whether there was an email from Aziz. To her delight, there was. Dear Ella, I was so happy to learn that things have improved between you and your daughter. As for me, I left the village of Momostenango yesterday at the crack of dawn. Strange, I stayed here only a few days, and yet when the time came to bid farewell, I felt sad, almost grieved. Would I ever see this tiny village in Guatemala again? I didn't think so. Each time I say goodbye to a place I like, I feel like I am leaving a part of me behind. I guess whether we choose to travel as much as Marco Polo did or stay in the same spot from cradle to grave, life is a sequence of births and deaths. Moments are born and moments die. For new experiences to come to light, old ones need to wither away. Don't you think while in Momostenango, I meditated and tried to visualize your aura? Before long, 3 colors came to me, warm yellow, timid orange, and reserved metallic purple. I had a feeling these were your colors. I thought they were beautiful both separately and together. My final stop in Guatemala is Chajal, a small town with adobe houses and children with eyes wise beyond their years. In each house, women of all ages weave magnificent tapestries. I asked a granny to choose a tapestry and said it was for a lady living in Northampton. After giving it some thought, she pulled a tapestry from a huge pile behind her. I swear to God, there were more than 50 tapestries of every possible color in that pile. Yet the one she chose for you was composed of only 3 tones, yellow, orange, and purple. I thought you might like to know about this coincidence, if there is such a thing in God's universe. Does it ever occur to you that our exchange might not be a result of coincidence? Warm regards, Aziz. P.S. If you want, I can send you your tapestry via mail, or I can wait till the day we meet for coffee and bring it myself. Ella closed her eyes and tried to imagine how the colors of her aura surrounded her face. Interestingly, the image of herself that popped up in her mind was not her grown-up self but her as a child, around 7 years of age. Many things came flooding back to her, memories that she thought she had long left behind. The sight of her mother standing still with a pistachio-green apron around her waist and a measuring cup in her hand, her face an ashen mask of pain, dangling paper hearts on the walls, bright and sparkly, and the body of her father hanging from the ceiling as if he wanted to blend with the Christmas decorations and give the house a festive look. She remembered how she had spent her teenage years holding her mother responsible for the suicide of her father. As a young girl, Ella had promised herself that when she got married, she would always make her husband happy and not fail in her marriage, like her mother. In her endeavor to make her marriage as different from her mother's as possible, she had not married a Christian man, preferring to marry inside her faith. It was only a few years earlier that Ella had stopped hating her aging mother, and though the two of them had been on good terms lately, the truth was, deep inside she still felt ill at ease when she remembered the past. Mom! Earth to Mom! Earth to Mom! Ella heard a ripple of giggles and whispers behind her shoulder. When she turned around, she saw 4 pairs of eyes watching her with amusement. Orly, Avi, Jeanette, and David had for once all come to breakfast at the same time and were now standing side by side inspecting her as if she were an exotic creature. From the way they looked, it seemed they had been standing there for a while, trying to get her attention. "Good morning, you all." Ella smiled. "How come you didn't hear us?" Orly asked, sounding genuinely surprised. "You seemed so absorbed in that screen," David said without looking at her. Ella's gaze followed her husband's, and there on the open screen in front of her, she saw Aziz Zahara's email shining dimly. In a flash she closed her laptop, without waiting for it to shut down. "I've got a lot of reading to do for the literary agency," Ella said, rolling her eyes. "I was working on my report." "No, you were not. You were reading your emails," Avi said, his face serious, matter of fact. What was it in teenage boys that made them so eager to detect everyone's flaws and lies? Ella wondered. But, to her relief, the others didn't seem interested in the subject. In fact, they were all looking somewhere else now, focused on the kitchen counter. It was Orly who turned to Ella, voicing the question for them all. "Mom, how come you haven't made us any breakfast this morning?" Now Ella turned to the counter and saw what they had seen. There was no coffee brewing, no scrambled eggs on the stove, no toast with blueberry sauce. She nodded repeatedly as if agreeing with an inner voice that spoke an undeniable truth. Right, she thought, how come she had forgotten the breakfast part too? Water. The things that are fluid, changing, and unpredictable. Rumi. Kanya, Octob ER 15, 1244. Bright and plump, the gorgeous full moon resembled a massive pearl hanging in the sky. I got up from the bed and looked out the window into the courtyard, awash in moonlight. Even seeing such beauty, however, did not soothe the pounding of my heart or the trembling of my hands. "Effendi, you look pale. Did you have the same dream again?" whispered my wife. "Shall I bring you a glass of water?" I told her not to worry and to go back to sleep. There was nothing she could do. Our dreams were part of our destiny, and they would run their course as God willed it. Besides, there must be a reason, I thought, that every night for the last 40 days I had been having the same dream. The beginning of the dream differed slightly each time. Or perhaps it was always the same, but I entered it from a different gate each evening. On this occasion I saw myself reading the Quran in a carpeted room that felt familiar but was like no place I had been before. Right across from me sat a dervish, tall, thin, and erect, with a veil on his face. He was holding a candelabrum with 5 glowing candles providing me with light so that I could read. After a while I lifted my head to show the dervish the verse I was reading, and only then did I realize, to my awe, that what I thought was a candelabrum was in fact the man's right hand. He had been holding out his hand to me, with each one of his fingers aflame. In panic I looked around for water, but there was none in sight. I took off my cloak and threw it on the dervish to extinguish the flames. But when I lifted the cloak, he had vanished, leaving only a burning candle behind. From this point onward, it was always the same dream. I started to look for him in the house, searching every nook and cranny. Next I ran into the courtyard, where the roses had blossomed in a sea of bright yellow. I called out left and right, but the man was nowhere to be seen. "Come back, beloved. Where are you?" Finally, as if led by an ominous intuition, I approached the well and peered down at the dark waters churning below. At first I couldn't see anything, but in a little while the moon showered me in its glittering light and the courtyard acquired a rare luminosity. Only then did I notice a pair of black eyes staring up at me with unprecedented sorrow from the bottom of the well. "They killed him!" somebody shouted. Perhaps it was me. Perhaps this was what my own voice would sound like in a state of infinite agony. And I screamed and screamed until my wife held me tight, drew me to her bosom, and asked softly, "Effendi, did you have the same dream again?" After Kara went back to sleep, I slipped into the courtyard. In that moment I had the impression that the dream was still with me, vivid and frightening. In the stillness of the night, the sight of the well sent a shiver down my spine, but I couldn't help sitting next to it, listening to the night breeze rustle gently through the trees. At times like these, I feel a sudden wave of sadness take hold of me, though I can never tell why. My life is complete and fulfilled, in that I have been blessed with the three things I hold most dear: knowledge, virtue, and the capability to help others find God. At age 38, I have been given by God more than I could ever have asked for. I have been trained as a preacher and a jurist and initiated into the science of divine intuition, the knowledge given to prophets, saints, and scholars in varying degrees. Guided by my late father, educated by the best teachers of our time, I have worked hard to deepen my awareness with the belief that this was the duty God had assigned me. My old master Syed Burhanuddin used to say I was one of God's beloved, since I was given the honorable task of delivering his message to his people and helping them differentiate right from wrong. For many years I have been teaching at the madrasa, discussing theology with other Sharia scholars, instructing my disciples, studying law and hadiths, giving sermons every Friday at the biggest mosque in town. I have long lost track of the number of students I have tutored. It is flattering to hear people praise my preaching skills and tell me how my words changed their lives at a time when they most needed guidance. I am blessed with a loving family, good friends, and loyal disciples. Never in my life have I suffered destitution or scarcity, although the loss of my first wife was devastating. I thought I would never get married again, but I did, and thanks to Kara I have experienced love and joy. Both of my sons are grown, although it never ceases to amaze me to see how different from each other they turned out to be. They are like two seeds that, though planted side by side in the same soil and nourished with the same sun and water, have blossomed into completely different plants. I am proud of them, just as I am proud of our adopted daughter, who has unique talents. I am a happy, satisfied man both in my private life and in the community. Why, then, do I feel this void inside me, growing deeper and wider with each passing day? It gnaws at my soul like a disease and accompanies me wherever I go, as quiet as a mouse and just as ravenous. Shams. Konya, October 17, 1244. Before passing through the gates of a town I've never visited, I take a minute to salute its saints, the dead and the living, the known and the hidden. Never in my life have I arrived at a new place without getting the blessing of its saints first. It makes no difference to me whether that place belongs to Muslims, Christians, or Jews. I believe that the saints are beyond such trivial nominal distinctions. A saint belongs to all humanity. So when I saw Konya for the first time from a distance, I did what I always did. But something unusual happened next. Instead of greeting me back and offering their blessings, as they always did, the saints remained as silent as broken tombstones. I saluted them again, more loudly and assertively this time, in case they had not heard me. But once again there followed silence. I realized that the saints had heard me, all right. They just weren't giving me their blessing. Tell me what's wrong, I asked the wind so that it would carry my words to the saints far and wide. In a little while, the wind returned with an answer. O dervish, in this city you'll find only two extremes, and nothing in between. Either pure love or pure hatred. We are warning you. Enter at your own risk. In that case there is no need to worry, I said. As long as I can encounter pure love, that'll be enough for me. Upon hearing that, the saints of Konya gave me their blessing. But I didn't want to enter the city just yet. I sat down under an oak tree, and as my horse munched on the sparse grass around, I looked at the city looming in the distance. The minarets of Konya glistened in the sun like shards of glass. Every now and then, I heard dogs barking, donkeys braying, children laughing, and vendors yelling at the top of their lungs ordinary sounds of a city throbbing with life. What kinds of joys and sorrows, I wondered, were being lived at this moment behind closed doors and latticed windows being used to an itinerant life. I found it slightly unnerving to have to settle in a city, but I recalled another fundamental rule: try not to resist the changes that come your way. Instead, let life live through you. And do not worry that your life is turning upside down. How do you know that the side you are used to is better than the one to come? A friendly voice yanked me out of my reverie. Salamun alaikum, dervish. When I turned around, I saw an olive-skinned, brawny peasant with a drooping mustache. He was riding a cart pulled by an ox so skinny that the poor thing looked as if it could at any moment breathe its last. Alaikum salam, may God bless you. I called out. Why are you sitting here on your own? If you are tired of riding that horse of yours, I could give you a lift. I smiled. Thanks, but I think I could go faster on foot than with your ox. Don't sell my ox short, the peasant said, sounding offended. He might be old and frail, but he is still my best friend. Put in my place by these words, I jumped to my feet and bowed before the peasant. How could I, a minor element in God's vast circle of creation, belittle another element in the circle, be it an animal or a human being? I apologize to you and your ox, I said. Please forgive me. A shadow of disbelief crossed the peasant's face. He stood deadpan for a moment, weighing whether he was mocking him or not. Nobody ever does that, he said when he spoke again, flashing me a warm smile. You mean apologize to your ox? Well, that, too. But I was thinking nobody ever apologizes to me. It's usually the other way round. I am the one who says sorry all the time. Even when people do me wrong, I apologize to them. I was touched to hear that. The Quran tells us each and every one of us was made in the best of molds. It's one of the rules, I said softly. What rule? He asked. God is busy with the completion of your work, both outwardly and inwardly. He is fully occupied with you. Every human being is a work in progress that is slowly but inexorably moving toward perfection. We are each an unfinished work of art, both waiting and striving to be completed. God deals with each of us separately because humanity is a fine art of skilled penmanship where every single dot is equally important for the entire picture. Are you here for the sermon, too? The peasant asked with a renewed interest. It looks like it's going to be very crowded. He is a remarkable man. My heart skipped a beat as I realized whom he was talking about. Tell me, what is so special about Rumi's sermons? The peasant fell quiet and squinted into the vast horizon for a while. His mind seemed to be everywhere and nowhere. Then he said, I come from a village that has had its share of hardships. First the famine, then the Mongols. They burned and plundered every village in their way. But what they did in the big cities was even worse. They captured Erzurum, Sivas, and Kayseri and massacred the entire male population, taking the women with them. I myself have not lost a loved one or my house. But I did lose something. I lost my joy. What's that got to do with Rumi? I asked. Dropping his gaze back to his ox, the peasant murmured tonelessly, everyone says if you listen to Rumi preach, your sadness will be cured. Personally, I didn't think there was anything wrong with sadness. Just the opposite, hypocrisy made people happy, and truth made them sad. But I didn't tell this to the peasant. Instead I said, why don't I join you until Konya, and you'll tell me more about Rumi. I tied my horse's reins to the cart and climbed in to sit beside the peasant, glad to see that the ox didn't mind the additional load. One way or the other, it walked the same excruciatingly slow walk. The peasant offered me bread and goat cheese. We ate as we talked. In this state, while the sun blazed in an indigo sky, and under the watchful eyes of the town's saints, I entered Konya. Take good care, my friend, I said as I jumped off the cart and loosened the reins of my horse. Make sure you come to the sermon. The peasant yelled expectantly. I nodded as I waved goodbye. Insh Allah. Although I was eager to listen to the sermon and dying to meet Rumi, I wanted to spend some time in the city first and learn what the townspeople thought about the great preacher. I wanted to see him through foreign eyes, kind and unkind, loving and unloving, before I looked on him with my own. Hassan the beggar. Konya, October 17, 1244. Believe it or not, they call this purgatory on earth holy suffering. I am a leper stuck in limbo. Neither the dead nor the living want me among them. Mothers point me out on the streets to scare their misbehaving toddlers, and children throw stones at me. Artisans chase me from their storefronts to ward off the bad luck that follows me everywhere, and pregnant women turn their faces away whenever they set eyes on me, fearing that their babies will be born defective. None of these people seem to realize that as keen as they are to avoid me, I am far keener to avoid them and their pitiful stares. It is the skin that changes first, becoming thicker and darker. Patches of varying sizes, the color of rotten eggs, appear on the shoulders, knees, arms, and face. There is a lot of stinging and burning in this phase, but then somehow the pain withers away, or else one becomes numb to it. Next the patches start to enlarge and swell up, turning into ugly bulbs. The hands turn to claws, and the face is so deformed as to be unrecognizable. Now that I am nearing the final stages, I cannot close my eyelids anymore. Tears and saliva flow without my control. 6 of the nails on my hands have fallen off, and one is on its way. Oddly enough, I still have my hair. I guess I should consider that lucky. I heard that in Europe lepers are kept outside the city walls. Here they let us live in the city as long as we carry a bell to warn other people of our presence. We are also allowed to beg, which is a good thing, because otherwise we would probably starve. Begging is one of only 2 ways to survive. The other is praying. Not because God pays special attention to lepers but because for some strange reason people think he does. Hence, as much as they despise us, the townspeople also respect us. They hire us to pray for the sick, the crippled, and the elderly. They pay and feed us well, hoping to squeeze out of our mouths a few extra prayers. On the streets, lepers might be treated worse than dogs, but in places where death and despair loom large, we are the sultans. Whenever I am hired to pray, I bow my head and make incomprehensible sounds in Arabic, pretending to be absorbed in prayer. Pretend is all I can do, for I don't think God hears me. I have no reason to believe he does. Though it is less profitable, I find begging much easier than praying. At least I am not deceiving anyone. Friday is the best day of the week to beg, except when it is Ramadan, in which case the whole month is quite lucrative. The last day of Ramadan is by far the best time to make money. That is when even the hopeless penny pinchers race to give alms, keen to compensate for all their sins, past and present. Once a year, people don't turn away from beggars. To the contrary, they specifically look for one, the more miserable the better. So profound is their need to show off how generous and charitable they are, not only do they race to give us alms, but for that single day they almost love us. Today could be a very profitable day, too, since Rumi is giving one of his Friday sermons. The mosque is already packed. Those who can't find a seat inside are lining up in the courtyard. The afternoon is the perfect occasion for panhandlers and pickpockets. And just like me, they are all present here, scattered within the crowd. I sat down right across from the entrance of the mosque with my back to a maple tree. There was a dank smell of rain in the air, mixed with the sweet, faint tang coming from the orchards far away. I put my mendicant bowl in front of me. Unlike many others in this business, I never have to openly ask for alms. A leper doesn't need to whine and implore, making up stories about how wretched his life is or how poor his health. Giving people a glimpse of my face has the effect of 1,000 words. So I simply uncovered me face and sat back. In the next hour, a few coins were dropped into my bowl. All were chipped copper. I yearned for a gold coin, with symbols of sun, lion, and crescent. Since the late Aladdin Kikubad had loosened the rules on currency, coins issued by the Beys of Aleppo, the Fatimid rulers in Cairo, and the Caliph of Baghdad, not to mention the Italian florin, were all pronounced valid. The rulers of Konya accepted them all, and so did the town's beggars. Together with the coins, a few dry leaves fell on my lap. The maple tree was shedding its reddish gold leaves, and as a gusty wind blew, quite a number of these made it into my bowl, as if the tree were giving me alms. Suddenly I realized that the maple tree and I had something in common. A tree shedding its leaves in autumn resembled a man shedding his limbs in the final stages of leprosy. I was a naked tree. My skin, my organs, my face falling apart. Every day another part of my body abandoned me. And for me, unlike the maple tree, there would be no spring in which I would blossom. What I lost forever. When people looked at me, they didn't see who I was but what I was missing. Whenever they placed a coin in my bowl, they did so with amazing speed and avoided any eye contact, as if my gaze were contagious. In their eyes I was worse than a thief or a murderer. As much as they disapproved of such outlaws, they didn't treat them as if they were invisible. When it came to me, however, all they saw was death staring them in the face. That's what scared them to recognize that death could be this close and this ugly. Suddenly there was a great commotion in the background. I heard somebody yell, "He is coming! He is coming!" Sure enough, there was Rumi, riding a horse as white as milk, wearing an exquisite amber kaftan embroidered with golden leaves and baby pearls, erect and proud, wise and noble, followed by a throng of admirers. Radiating an air of charisma and confidence, he looked less like a scholar than a ruler, the sultan of the wind, the fire, the water, and the earth. Even his horse stood tall and firm, as if aware of the distinction of the man he carried. I pocketed the coins in my bowl, wrapped my head so as to leave half of my face in the open, and entered the mosque. Inside, it was so packed it seemed impossible to breathe, let alone find a seat. But the one good thing about being a leper was that no matter how crowded a place, I could always find a seat, since nobody wanted to sit next to me. "Brothers," Rumi said, his voice rising high, sweeping low. "The vastness of the universe makes us feel small, even inconsequential. Some of you might be asking, what meaning could I, in my limitedness, possibly have for God? This, I believe, is a question that has occurred to many from time to time. In today's sermon I want to generate some specific answers to that." Rumi's two sons were in the front row, the handsome one, Sultan Walid, who everyone said resembled his late mother, and the young one, Aladdin, with an animated face but curiously furtive eyes. I could see that both were proud of their father. The children of Adam were honored with knowledge so great that neither the mountains nor the heavens could shoulder it, Rumi continued. That is why it says in the Quran, truly we offered the trust to the heavens and the earth and the mountains, but they refused to bear it because they were afraid of it. Only man took it up. Having been given such an honorable position, human beings should not aim any lower than what God had intended. Pronouncing his vowels in that strange way only the educated are capable of, Rumi talked about God, assuring us that he dwelled not on a distant throne in the sky but very close to each and every one of us. What brought us even closer to God, he said, was none other than suffering. Your hand opens and closes all the time. If it did not, you would be paralyzed. Your deepest presence is in every small contracting and expanding. The two are as beautifully balanced and coordinated as the wings of a bird. At first I liked what he said. It warmed my heart to think of joy and sorrow as dependent on each other as a bird's wings. But almost instantly I felt a wave of resentment rise up in my throat. What did Rumi know about suffering? As the son of an eminent man and heir to a wealthy, prominent family, life had always been good to him. I knew he had lost his first wife, but I didn't believe he had ever experienced real misfortune. Born with a silver spoon in his mouth, raised in distinguished circles, tutored by the best scholars, and always loved, pampered, and admired, how dare he preach on suffering with a sinking heart? I realized that the contrast between Rumi and me couldn't be greater. Why was God so unfair to me? He had given poverty, sickness, and misery. To Rumi riches, success, and wisdom. With his flawless reputation and royal demeanor, he hardly belonged to this world, at least not to this city. I had to cover my face if I didn't want people to be revolted by the sight of me, while he shone in public like a precious gem. I wondered how he would fare if he were in my shoes. Had it ever occurred to him that even someone as perfect and privileged as he could someday tumble and fall? Had he ever contemplated how it would feel to be an outcast? Even for one day would he still be the great Rumi if he had been given the life I was given? With each new question, my resentment rose, sweeping away whatever admiration I might otherwise have had for him. Bitter and petulant, I stood up and pushed my way out. Several people in the audience eyed me curiously, wondering why I was leaving a sermon that so many others were dying to attend. Shams, Kanya, Octob er 17, 1244. Beholden to the peasant who dropped me off at the town center, I found myself and my horse a place to stay. The inn of sugar vendors seemed just what I needed. Of the 4 rooms I was shown, I chose the one with the fewest possessions, which consisted of a sleeping mat with a moldy blanket, an oil lamp that was sputtering its last, a sun-dried brick that I could use as a pillow, and a good view of the whole town up to the base of the surrounding hills. Having thus settled down, I roamed the streets, amazed at the mixture of religions, customs, and languages permeating the air. I ran into gypsy musicians, Arab travelers, Christian pilgrims, Jewish merchants, Buddhist priests, Frankish troubadours, Persian artists, Chinese acrobats, Indian snake charmers, Zoroastrian magicians, and Greek philosophers. In the slave market, I saw concubines with skin white as milk and hefty, dark eunuchs who had seen such atrocities that they had lost their ability to speak. In the bazaar I came across traveling barbers with bloodletting devices, fortune-tellers with crystal balls, and magicians who swallowed fire. There were pilgrims on their way to Jerusalem and vagrants who I suspected were runaway soldiers from the last crusades. I heard people speak Venetian, Frankish, Saxon, Greek, Persian, Turkish, Kurdish, Armenian, Hebrew, and several other dialects I couldn't even distinguish. Despite their seemingly endless differences, all of these people gave off a similar air of incompleteness, of the works in progress that they were, each an unfinished masterwork. The whole city was a Tower of Babel. Everything was constantly shifting, splitting, coming to light, transpiring, thriving, dissolving, decomposing, and dying. Amid this chaos I stood in a place of unperturbed silence and serenity, utterly indifferent to the world and yet at the same time feeling a burning love for all the people struggling and suffering in it. As I watched the people around me, I recalled another golden rule: it's easy to love a perfect God, unblemished and infallible that He is. What is far more difficult is to love fellow human beings with all their imperfections and defects. Remember, one can only know what one is capable of loving. There is no wisdom without love. Unless we learn to love God's creation, we can neither truly love nor truly know God. I roamed the narrow alleys where artisans of all ages toiled in their small, dingy stores. In every place I visited, I overheard the townspeople talk about Rumi. How did it feel, I wondered, to be this popular? How did it affect his ego? My mind busy with these questions, I strolled in the opposite direction from the mosque where Rumi was preaching. Gradually the surroundings began to change. As I moved northward, the houses became more dilapidated, the garden walls falling down, and the children more raucous and unruly. The smells changed, too, getting heavier, more garlicky and spicy. Finally I stepped into a street where three odors loomed in the air: sweat, perfume, and lust. I had reached the seamy side of town. There was a ramshackle house atop the steep cobbled street, the walls supported by bamboo pillars, the roof of thatched grass. In front of the house, a group of women sat chatting. When they saw me approach, they eyed me curiously, looking half amused. Beside them was a garden with roses of every color and shade imaginable and the most amazing smell. I wondered who tended to them. I didn't have to wait too long to learn the answer. No sooner had I reached the garden than the entrance door of the house was flung open and a woman dashed out. She was heavy-jowled, tall, and enormously fat. When she squinted, the way she did now, her eyes were lost in rolls of flesh. She had a thin, dark mustache and thick sideburns. It took me a while to comprehend that she was both man and woman. "What do you want?" the hermaphrodite asked suspiciously. Her face was in constant flux. A moment it looked like the face of a woman, then the tide came back, replacing it with the face of a man. I introduced myself and asked her name, but she ignored my question. "This is no place for you," she said, waving her hands as if I were a fly she'd like to chase away. "Why not? Don't you see this place is a brothel? Don't you dervishes take an oath to stay away from lust? People think I wallow in sin here, but I give my alms and close my doors in the month of Ramadan. And now I'm saving you. Stay away from us. This is the filthiest corner in town." "Filth is inside, not outside," I objected. "Thus says the rule." "What are you talking about?" she croaked. "It is one of the 40 rules," I tried to explain. "Real filth is the one inside. The rest simply washes off. There is only one type of dirt that cannot be cleansed with pure waters, and that is the stain of hatred and bigotry contaminating the soul. You can purify your body through abstinence and fasting, but only love will purify your heart." The hermaphrodite was having none of it. "You dervishes are out of your minds. I've got all sorts of customers here. But a dervish when frogs grow beards. If I let you linger, God will raise this place to the ground and put a curse on us for seducing a man of faith." I couldn't help chuckling. "Where do you get these ridiculous ideas? Do you think God is an angry, moody patriarch watching us from the skies above so that he can rain stones and frogs on our heads the moment we err?" The patron pulled at the ends of her thin mustache, giving me an annoyed look that verged on meanness. "Don't worry, I'm not here to visit your brothel," I assured her. "I was just admiring your rose garden." "Oh, that the hermaphrodite shrugged dismissively is the creation of one of my girls, Desert Rose. With that, the patron gestured to a young woman sitting among the harlots ahead of us. Delicate chin, pearl luster skin, and dark almond eyes clouded with worry. She was heartbreakingly beautiful. As I looked at her, I had a sense she was someone in the process of a big transformation. I dropped my voice to a whisper so that only the patron could hear me. That girl is a good girl. One day soon she'll embark on a spiritual journey to find God. She'll abandon this place forever. When that day comes, do not try to stop her. The hermaphrodite looked at me flabbergasted before she burst out, "What the hell are you talking about? Nobody is telling me what to do with my girls. You better get the hell out of here. Or else I'm calling Jackal-head." "Who's that?" I asked. "Believe me, you wouldn't want to know," the hermaphrodite said, shaking her finger to emphasize her point. Hearing the name of this stranger made me shiver slightly, but I didn't dwell on it. "Anyway, I'm leaving," I said. "But I'll come back, so don't be surprised next time you see me around. I'm not one of those pious types who spend their whole lives hunched on prayer rugs while their eyes and hearts remain closed to the outside world. They read the Quran only on the surface. But I read the Quran in the budding flowers and migrating birds. I read the breathing Quran secreted in human beings." "You mean you read people?" The patron laughed a half-hearted laugh. "What kind of nonsense is that? Every man is an open book, each and every one of us a walking Quran. The quest for God is ingrained in the hearts of all, be it a prostitute or a saint. Love exists within each of us from the moment we are born and waits to be discovered from then on. That is what one of the 40 rules is all about. The whole universe is contained within a single human being, you. Everything that you see around, including the things you might not be fond of and even the people you despise or abhor, is present within you in varying degrees. Therefore, do not look for shaitan outside yourself either. The devil is not an extraordinary force that attacks from without. It is an ordinary voice within. If you get to know yourself fully, facing with honesty and hardness both your dark and bright sides, you will arrive at a supreme form of consciousness. When a person knows himself or herself, he or she knows God." Crossing her arms above her chest, the hermaphrodite leaned forward and squinted at me menacingly. "A dervish who preaches to harlots," she grunted. "I warn you, I'm not going to let you badger anyone around here with your silly ideas. You better stay away from my brothel. Because if you don't, I swear to God, Jackal-head will cut off that sharp tongue of yours and I'll eat it with pleasure." Ella. Northampton, May 28, 2008. Befitting her general mood, Ella woke up sad. But not sad as in weepy and unhappy, only sad as in unwilling to smile and take things lightly. She felt as though she had reached a milestone she was not prepared for. As she was brewing coffee in the kitchen, she took her list of resolutions out of the drawer and scanned through it. 10 things to do before turning 40. 1. Improve your time management, be better organized, and be determined to make the most of your time. Buy a new day planner. Accomplished. 2. Add mineral supplements and antioxidants to your diet. Accomplished. 3. Take action for fewer wrinkles. Try alpha hydroxy products, and start using the new L'Oreal cream. Accomplished. 4. Change the upholstery, buy new plants, get new cushions. Accomplished. 5. Evaluate your life, values, and beliefs. Half accomplished. 6. Eliminate meat from your diet, make a healthy menu every week, and start giving your body the respect it deserves. Half accomplished. 7. Start reading Rumi's poems. Accomplished. 8. Take the kids to a Broadway musical. Accomplished. 9. Start writing a cookbook. Unaccomplished. 10. Open your heart to love. Ella stood still, her eyes fixed on the 10th item on her list, not knowing whether to put a check next to it or not. She didn't even know what she meant when she wrote that. What was she thinking? It must be the effect of sweet blasphemy, she murmured to herself. Lately she found herself frequently thinking about love. Dear Aziz, today is my birthday. I feel like I have reached a milestone in my life. They say turning 40 is a defining moment, especially for women. They also say that 40 is the new 30 and 60 is the new 40, but as much as I'd like to believe all that, it sounds too far-fetched to me. I mean, who are we kidding? 40 is 40. I guess now I'll have more of everything, more knowledge, more wisdom, and of course more wrinkles and gray hair. Birthdays have always made me happy, but this morning I woke up with heaviness in my chest, asking questions too large for someone who hadn't even had her morning coffee yet. I kept wondering, is the way I've lived my life the way I want to continue from now on? And then a fearful feeling came over me. What if both a yes and a no might generate equally disastrous consequences? So I found another answer, maybe. Warm wishes, Ella P.S. Sorry I couldn't write a more cheerful email. I don't know why I'm down in the dumps today. I can't give you a reason. That is, other than turning 40. I guess this is what they call midlife crisis. Dear Ella, happy birthday. 40 is a most beautiful age for both men and women. Did you know that in mystic thought 40 symbolizes the ascent from one level to a higher one and spiritual awakening? When we mourn for 40 days. When a baby is born, it takes 40 days for him to get ready to start life on earth. And when we are in love, we need to wait for 40 days to be sure of our feelings. The flood of Noah lasted 40 days, and while the waters destroyed life, they also washed all impurity away and enabled human beings to make a new, fresh start. In Islamic mysticism there are 40 degrees between man and God. Likewise, there are 4 basic stages of consciousness and 10 degrees in each, making 40 levels in total. Jesus went into the wilderness for 40 days and nights. Muhammad was 40 years old when he received the call to become a prophet. Buddha meditated under a linden tree for 40 days. Not to mention the 40 rules of Shams. You receive a new mission at 40, a new lease on life. You have reached a most auspicious number. Congratulations! And don't worry about getting old. There are no wrinkles or gray hair strong enough to defy the power of 40. Warmly, Aziz Desert Rose the Harlot. Konya, Octob ER 17, 1244. Brothels have existed since the beginning of time. And so have women like me. But there is something that amazes me. Why is it that although people say they hate seeing women prostitute themselves, the same people make life hard for a prostitute who wants to repent and start life anew? It is as if they are telling us they are sorry that we have fallen so low, but now that we are where we are, we should stay there forever. I don't know why this is. All I know is, some people feed on the miseries of others and they don't like it when there is one less miserable person on the face of the earth. But no matter what they say or do, I am going to walk out of this place one day. This morning I woke up bursting with a desire to listen to the great Rumi preach. Had I told the patron the truth and asked permission, she would have made fun of me. Since when do whores go to mosques, she would have said, laughing so hard her round face would have turned crimson. That's why I lied. After that hairless dervish left, the patron looked so preoccupied I sensed it was the right time to go and talk. She is always more approachable when distracted. I told her I needed to go to the bazaar to run some errands. She believed me. After 9 years of my working like a dog for her, she does. Only on one condition, she said. Sesame is coming with you. That wasn't a problem. I liked Sesame. A big, hefty man with the mind of a child, he was reliable and honest to the point of simplicity. How he survived in such a cruel world was a mystery to me. Nobody knew what his real name was, perhaps not even himself. We had named him so because of his infatuation with sesame halva. When a harlot from the brothel needed to go out, Sesame accompanied her like a silent shadow. He was the best guard I could have wished for. The two of us took the dusty road winding through the orchards. When we reached the first intersection, I asked Sesame to wait for me, and I disappeared behind a bush where I had hidden a bag full of men's clothes. It was harder than I thought to dress up as a man. Wrapping long scarves around my breasts, I flattened my chest. Then I put on baggy trousers, a cotton vest, a long maroon robe, and a turban. Finally I covered half my face with a scarf, hoping to resemble an Arab traveler. When I walked back toward him, Sesame flinched, looking puzzled. "Let us go," I urged him, and when he didn't budge, I uncovered my face. "My dear, haven't you recognized me?" "Desert Rose, is that you?" Sesame exclaimed, putting one hand on his mouth like a child in awe. "Why did you dress up like that? Can you keep a secret?" Sesame nodded, his eyes widening with excitement. "All right," I whispered. "We are going to a mosque. But don't tell the patron." Sesame's bottom lip quivered. "No, no. We were going to the bazaar." "Yes, dear, later. First we are going to listen to the great Rumi." Sesame panicked slightly, as I knew he would. The change in plans was unsettling to him. "Please, this means a lot to me," I begged. "If you agree and promise not to tell anyone about it, I'll buy you a huge chunk of halva." "Halva." Sesame clucked his tongue with delight, as if the word alone had left a sweet taste in his mouth. And with sweet expectation, we set off toward the mosque where Rumi was going to speak. I was born in a small village near Nicaea. My mother always said to me, "You were born in the right place," but I am afraid it was under the wrong star. The times were bad, unpredictable. From one year to the next, nothing remained the same. First there were rumors of the Crusaders coming back. We heard terrible stories about the atrocities they committed in Constantinople, ransacking the mansions, demolishing the icons inside chapels and churches. Next we heard about Seljuk attacks. And before the tales of terror of the Seljuk army faded, those of the ruthless Mongols started. The name and the face of the enemy changed, but the fear of being destroyed by outsiders remained as steady as snow on Mount Ida. My parents were bakers and good Christians. One of my earliest memories is the smell of bread out of the oven. We weren't rich. Even as a child, I knew that. But we weren't poor either. I had seen the stare in the eyes of the poor when they came to the bakery begging for crumbs. Every night before going to sleep, I thanked the Lord for not sending me to bed hungry. It felt like talking to a friend. For back then God was my friend. When I was 7, my mother became pregnant. Looking back today, I suspect she might have had several miscarriages before that, but I didn't know anything about such things. I was so innocent that if anyone asked me how babies were made, I would have said God kneaded them out of soft, sweet dough. But the bread baby that God kneaded for my mother must have been enormous, because before long her belly swelled up, big and tight. Mother had become so huge she could barely move. The midwife said her body was retaining water, but that didn't sound like a bad thing to me. What neither my mother nor the midwife knew was, there wasn't one baby but 3. All were boys. My brothers had waged a war inside my mother's body. One of the triplets had strangled his brother with his umbilical cord, and as if to take revenge, the dead baby had blocked the passage, thus preventing the others from coming out. For 4 days my mother remained in labor. Night and day we listened to her screams until we heard her no more. Unable to save my mother, the midwife did her best to save my brothers. Taking a pair of scissors, she cut my mom's belly open, but in the end only one baby survived. This is how my brother was born. My father never forgave him, and when the baby was baptized, he did not attend the ceremony. With my mother gone and my father turned into a sullen, bitter man, life was never the same. Things rapidly deteriorated at the bakery. We lost our customers. Afraid of becoming poor and having to beg someday, I started to hide bread rolls under my bed, where they would get dry and stale. But it was my brother who really suffered. I at least had been loved and taken good care of in the past. He never had any of that. It broke my heart to see him being mistreated, and yet a part of me was relieved, even grateful, that it wasn't I who had become the target of my father's fury. I wish I had protected my brother. Everything would be different then, and I wouldn't be in a brothel in Konya today. Life is so strange. A year later my father remarried. The only difference in my brother's life was that whereas before it was my father who ill-treated him, now it was my father and his new wife who did so. He started to run away from home, only to come back with the worst habits and the wrong friends. One day my father beat him so badly he almost killed him. After that, the boy changed. There was a cold, cruel stare in his eyes that wasn't there before. I knew he had something in mind, but it never occurred to me what a horrible plan he was brewing. I wish I had known. I wish I could have prevented the tragedy. Then, one morning in spring, my father and stepmother were found dead, killed with rat poison. As soon as the incident became public, everyone suspected my brother. When the guards started asking questions, he ran away in panic. I never saw him again. And just like that, I was alone in the world. Unable to stay at home where I still sensed my mother's smell, unable to work at the bakery where disturbing memories hovered in the air, I decided to go to Constantinople to stay with an old spinster aunt who had now become my closest relative. I was 13. I took a carriage to Constantinople. I was the youngest passenger on board and the only one traveling alone. A few hours on the road, we were stopped by a gang of robbers. They took everything: suitcases, clothes, boots, belts, and jewelry, even the driver's sausages. Having nothing to give them, I stood aside quietly, certain that they would do me no harm. But just when they were about to leave, the gang leader turned to me and asked, "Are you a virgin, dainty thing?" I blushed and refused to answer such an improper question. Little did I know that my blushing was the answer he wanted. "Let us go!" the gang leader shouted. "Take the horses and the girl." While I resisted them in tears, none of the other passengers even tried to help me. The robbers took me to a thick, dense forest, where I was surprised to see they had created a whole village. There were women and children. Ducks, goats, and pigs were all over the place. It looked like an idyllic village, except it was inhabited by criminals. Soon I understood why the gang leader had asked me if I was a virgin. The chief of the village was severely ill with nervous fever. He had been in bed for a long time, with red spots all over his body, trying countless treatments to no avail. Recently someone had convinced him that if he slept with a virgin, his illness would be transmitted to her and he would be clean and cured. There are things in my life I don't want to remember. My time in the forest is one of them. Even today, whenever the forest comes to my mind, I think of the pine trees and only the pine trees. I preferred sitting alone under those trees to the company of the women in the village, most of whom were the wives or daughters of the robbers. There were also a number of harlots who had come there on their own. I couldn't understand for the life of me why they didn't run away. I was determined to do so. There were carriages crossing the forest, most of them belonging to the nobility. It was a mystery to me why they were not robbed, until I realized that some carriage drivers bribed the robbers before passing through the forest and in return got the right to travel safely. Once I figured out how things worked, I cut my own deal. After stopping a carriage heading to the big city, I pleaded with the driver to take me with him. He asked too much money, although he knew I had none. I paid him the only way I knew how. Only long after I arrived in Constantinople would I comprehend why the harlots in the forest would never run away. The city was worse. It was ruthless. I never looked for my old aunt. Now that I was fallen, I knew a proper lady like her wouldn't want me. I was on my own. It didn't take the city long to crush my spirits and ruin my body. Suddenly I was in another world altogether, a world of malice, rape, brutality, and disease. I had successive abortions until I was damaged so badly that I stopped having periods and could no longer conceive. I saw things on those streets for which I have no words. After I left the city, I traveled with soldiers, performers, and gypsies, serving the needs of all. Then a man called Jackal had found me and brought me to this brothel in Konya. The patron wasn't interested in where I came from as long as I was in good shape. She was delighted to learn I couldn't have babies and would not cause her any problems in that respect. To refer to my barrenness, she named me Dessert, and to embellish that name somewhat, she added Rose, which was fine with me, as I adored roses. Which is how I think of faith, like a hidden rose garden where I once roamed and inhaled its perfumed smells but can no longer enter. I want God to be my friend again. With that longing I am circling that garden, searching for an entrance, hoping to find a gate that will let me in. When Sesame and I reached the mosque, I couldn't believe my eyes. Men of all ages and professions occupied every corner, even the place in the back that would normally be reserved for women. I was about to give up and leave when I noticed a beggar relinquish his seat and inch his way out. Thanking my lucky stars, I wriggled into his space, leaving Sesame outside. This is how I found myself listening to the great Rumi in a mosque full of men. I didn't even want to think what could happen if they found out there was a woman amid them, let alone a harlot. Chasing off all dark thoughts, I gave my full attention to the sermon. God created suffering so that joy might appear through its opposite, Rumi said. Things become manifest through opposites. Since God has no opposite, he remains hidden. As the preacher talked, his voice rose and swelled like a mountain stream fed by the melting snow. Look at the abasement of the earth and the exaltation of the heavens. Know that all the states of the world are like this, flooding and drought, peace and war. Whatever happens, do not forget, nothing God has created is in vain, whether wrath or forbearance, honesty or guile. Sitting there, I saw that everything served a purpose. My mother's pregnancy and the war in her womb, my brother's incurable loneliness, even the murder of my father and stepmother, my dreadful days in the forest, and every brutality I saw on the streets of Constantinople, they each contributed, in their own way, to my story. Behind all hardships was a larger scheme. I couldn't make it out clearly, but I could feel it with my whole heart. Listening to Rumi in a packed mosque on that afternoon, I felt a cloud of tranquility descend over me, as delightful and soothing as the sight of my mother baking bread. Hassan the beggar. Konya, October 17, 1244. Bristling with irritation, I sat under the maple tree. I continued to be angry at Rumi for his flamboyant speech on suffering, a subject he clearly knew little about. The shadow of the minaret inched its way across the street. Half dozing, half eyeing the passers-by. I was about to fall asleep when I caught sight of a dervish I had never seen before. Dressed in black rags, holding a large staff in his hand, with no facial hair and a tiny silver earring in one ear, he looked so different that I couldn't help fixing my gaze upon him. As his eyes scanned left and right, it didn't take the dervish long to notice me. Instead of ignoring my presence, the way people who saw me for the first time always did, he put his right hand on his heart and greeted me as if we were two old friends. I was so stunned I looked around just to make sure he wasn't greeting someone else. But there was only me and the maple tree. Dazed, confused, I nonetheless put my hand on my heart and greeted him back. Slowly the dervish walked toward me. I lowered my gaze, expecting him to leave a copper coin in my bowl or hand me a piece of bread. But instead he knelt down to my eye level. "Salamun alaikum, beggar," he said. "Alaikum salam, dervish," I responded. My voice sounded hoarse and strange to me. It had been such a long time since I'd felt the need to speak to anyone that I had almost forgotten what my voice sounded like. He introduced himself as Shams of Tabriz and asked my name. I laughed. "What does a man like me need a name for?" "Everybody has a name," he objected. "God has countless names. Of those, only 99 are known to us. If God has so many names, how can a human being who is the very reflection of him go around without a name?" I didn't know how to respond to that, and so didn't even try. Instead I conceded, "I had a wife and a mother once. They used to call me Hassan." "Hassan it is, then?" The dervish nodded. Then, to my surprise, he gave me a silver mirror. "Keep it," he said. "A good man in Baghdad gave it to me, but you need it more than I do. It will remind you that you bear God within you." Before I found the chance to say anything in return, a commotion broke out in the background. The first thing that came to my mind was that a pickpocket had been caught in the mosque. But when the shouts grew louder and fiercer, I knew that it had to be something bigger. No pickpocket would create such an uproar. We found out soon enough. A woman, a known prostitute, had been found in the mosque dressed up as a man. A group of people were shoving her out, chanting, "Lash the deceiver! Lash the whore!" In this state the angry mob reached the street. I caught sight of the young woman in men's clothing. Her face was pale as death and her almond eyes terrified. I had seen many lynchings before. It never ceased to amaze me how dramatically people changed when they joined a mob. Ordinary men with no history of violence, artisans, vendors, or peddlers, turned aggressive to the point of murder when they banded together. Lynchings were common and ended with the corpses put on display to deter others. "Poor woman," I muttered to Shams of Tabriz, but when I turned to him for a response, there was no one standing there. I caught sight of the dervish darting toward the mob, like a flaming arrow shot straight up into the sky. I jumped to my feet and rushed to catch up with him. When he reached the head of the procession, Shams raised his staff like a flag and yelled at the top of his voice, "Stop it, people! Halt!" Baffled, and suddenly silent, the men stared at him in wonder. "You should all be ashamed of yourselves!" Shams of Tabriz shouted as he struck the ground with his staff. 30 men against 1 woman. Is that fair? "She doesn't deserve fairness," said a square-faced, burly man with a lazy eye, who seemed to have proclaimed himself the leader of this impromptu group. I recognized him instantly. He was a security guard named Baibars, a man all the beggars in town knew well for his cruelty and rapacity. "This woman here dressed up as a man and sneaked into the mosque to deceive good Muslims," Baibars said. "Are you telling me you want to punish a person for going into a mosque? Is that a crime?" Shams of Tabriz asked, his voice dripping with scorn. The question created a momentary lull. Apparently nobody had thought of it that way. "She is a whore!" yelled another man, who looked so enraged that his face had turned a dark scarlet color. "She has no place in a holy mosque." That seemed enough to inflame the group again. "Whore! Whore!" A few people at the back chanted in unison. "Let us get the whore!" As if that were an order, a young lad leaped forward and grabbed the woman's turban, yanking it forcefully. The turban came loose, and the woman's long blonde hair, bright as sunflowers, fell down in graceful waves. We all held our breath, astonished by her youth and beauty. Shams must have recognized the mixed feelings in the air, for he reproached them without skipping a beat. "You have to make up your minds, brothers. Do you really despise this woman, or do you in fact desire her?" With that, the dervish caught the harlot's hand and pulled her toward him, away from the young lad and the mob. She hid behind him, like a little girl hiding behind her mother's skirts. "You are making a big mistake," the leader of the group said, raising his voice above the murmur of the crowd. "You are a stranger in this town and don't know our ways. Stay out of this matter." Someone else chimed in. "What kind of a dervish are you anyway? Don't you have anything better to do than to defend the interests of a whore?" Shams of Tabriz was quiet for a moment, as if considering the questions. He displayed no temper, remaining invariably tranquil. Then he said, "But how did you notice her in the first place? You go to a mosque but pay more attention to the people around you than to God. If you were the good believers you claim to be, you would not have noticed this woman even if she were naked. Now, go back to the sermon and do a better job this time." An awkward silence descended on the entire street. Leaves skittered along the sidewalk, and for a moment they were the only things that moved. "Come on, you lot! Off you go, back to the sermon." Shams of Tabriz waved his staff, shooing the men away like flies. They did not all turn and walk away, but they did take a few steps back, swaying unsteadily, puzzled as to what to do next. A few of them were looking in the direction of the mosque as if considering returning. It was exactly then that the harlot mustered the courage to get out from behind the dervish. Fast as a rabbit, she took to her heels, her long hair flying every which way while she scurried into the closest side street. Only 2 men attempted to chase her. But Shams of Tabriz blocked their path, swinging his staff under their feet with such suddenness and force that they tumbled over and fell down. A few passers-by laughed at the sight, and so did I. Embarrassed and stupefied, the 2 men managed to get to their feet again, but by that time the harlot had long vanished and the dervish was walking away, his work here done. Suleiman the drunk. Konya, Octob ER 17, 1244. Before the commotion I was snoozing peacefully with my back to the tavern wall, and then the racket outside made me nearly jump out of my skin. "What's going on?" I screamed as my eyes snapped open. "Did the Mongols attack us?" There was a ripple of laughter. I turned around and found several other customers making fun of me. "Dirty bastards! Don't you worry, old drunk!" yelled Hristos, the tavern owner. "No Mongols coming after you. It's Rumi passing by with an army of admirers." I went to the window and looked out. Sure enough, there they were, an excited procession of disciples and admirers repeatedly chanting, "God is great! God is great!" In the middle of it all was the erect figure of Rumi, mounted on a white horse, radiating strength and confidence. I opened the window, ducked my head out, and watched them. Moving at a pace no faster than a snail's, the procession came very near. In fact, some of the crowd were so close that I could easily have touched a few heads. Suddenly I had a brilliant idea. I was going to snatch off some people's turbans. I grabbed the wooden back scratcher that belongs to Hristos. Holding the window open with one hand and the scratcher in the other, I leaned forward, managing to reach the turban of a man in the crowd. I was just about to pull the turban off when another man inadvertently looked up and saw me. "Salamun alaikum," I saluted, smiling from ear to ear. "A Muslim in a tavern? Shame on you!" The man roared. "Don't you know wine is the handiwork of shaitan?" I opened my mouth to answer, but before I could make a sound, something sharp whizzed by my head. I realized in sheer horror that it was a stone. If I hadn't ducked at the last second, it would have cracked my skull. Instead it had shot through the open window, landing on the table of the Persian merchant sitting behind me. Too tipsy to comprehend what had happened, the merchant held the stone in his hand, examining it as if it were an obscure message from the skies. "Suleiman, close that window and go back to your table," Christos bellowed, his voice hoarse with worry. "Did you see what happened?" I said as I staggered back toward my table. "Someone hurled a stone at me. They could have killed me." Christos raised an eyebrow. "I'm sorry, but what were you expecting? Don't you know there are people who don't want to see a Muslim in a tavern, and here you are displaying yourself, reeking of alcohol, your nose glowing like a red lantern." "So what?" I stuttered. "Am I not a human being?" Christos patted me on the shoulder as if to say, "Don't be so touchy. You know, this is exactly why I abhor religion. All sorts of them. Religious people are so confident of having God by their side that they think they are superior to everyone else," I said. Christos did not respond. He was a religious man, but also a skilled tavern owner who knew how to soothe an incensed customer. He brought me another carafe of red wine and watched me as I guzzled it. Outside, a wild wind blew, slamming shut the windows and scattering dry leaves left and right. For a moment we stood still, listening carefully, as if there were a melody to be heard. "I don't understand why wine was forbidden in this world but promised in heaven," I said. "If it's as bad as they claim, why would they serve it in paradise?" "Questions, questions," Christos murmured as he threw his hands up. "You are always full of questions. Do you have to question everything?" "Of course I do. That's why we were given a brain, don't you think? Suleiman, I have known you for a long time. You are not just any customer to me. You are my friend. And I worry about you." "I'll be fine," I said, but Christos interrupted me.